Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes.
And I'm Kevin Graham.
And today we're delighted to be joined by Tom Campbell. Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind, Tom.
Thank you, Paul.
The legendary
Tom, who's flown in from Canada just to chat to us today.
I didn't fly in, I took a plane.
Tom, I've enjoyed over the last few years talking to you about your memories of Celtic. What are your early European memories of Celtic?
Well, growing up, there were very few, because the only time Celtic went to Europe was the occasional friendly game in the Republic of Ireland. I presume that's Europe. And also, there was one game in 1950 when Celtic went to Rome to play Lazio for the Lazio's 50th anniversary. That's the only time they've played in Europe when I was growing up.
So you saw the introduction of the European tournaments?
Yes and no. I saw some of them, but you must remember I was in Canada for most of that time. So I saw very few of them.
With regards to that, Tom, and the whole point of discussing Celtic's European endeavours is to try and get a link to where we were then and where we are now. What's your memories of Celtic's European Cup Winners' Cup semi-final in 1964?
I think the word bittersweet comes to mind. We did very well. I think we actually beat Bratislava 1-0 home and away, which is a major accomplishment. Then we beat the team from Budapest, MTK, I think. Beat them 3-0 at Celtic Park. The tie was over. We went to Budapest in a stadium that held 100,000. There was 9,000 there. And Bob Kelly told his team that Celtic had an obligation to entertain the Hungarian public. They certainly did. They lost 4-0. That's what I think you call bittersweet.
Bittersweet indeed. Now that experience involved many of the players who would later on, just a few short years later, win the European Cup. Now, you remember vividly where you were the day that Celtic won that game against Inter Milan. What's your memories of that?
Yes, I was teaching, I think maybe absent-mindedly. In fact, the vice principal, that's the second headmaster, he knew I was a keen Celtic fan, and there's a 5-hour time difference. So I was busy teaching, the phone rang, and it was him down in the office. Tom, there's a football result you might be interested in. Yes, Inter Milan won. So I just slammed down the phone, threw a couple of kids out the window and carried on. And then the phone rang again and said, Tom, I haven't finished. Inter Milan 1, Celtic 2. So that's my vivid memory of that day.
Again, European competition was really in its infancy, Tom. Didn't seem to have the kind of importance that we now place on it. Did you realise how massive an achievement and an accomplishment that was?
It was unbelievable. I think this was Celtic's first attempt in the European Cup. And of course, things changed when Jock Stein came. And I just could not believe it. But on the other hand, you never expected to lose in those days. There was a momentum that just carried on and on.
Do you think, after winning in Lisbon, that the Lions underachieved, or Stein underachieved, between 67 and 74?
That's a long time. I think that's almost more than one team, you know. I think 1970 might be the end of the Lions. They were a bit unlucky in a couple of European Cup semi-finals, but it's kind of hard. It just shows you how hard it was to win it in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I thought for a couple of years after Lisbon, Celtic were actually a better team, but they didn't quite have that element of surprise about them anymore. I mean, the second year with Jock Stein, I thought there was something about that team that was almost miraculous. As Billy McNeill used to say, it was a fairy tale element about Celtic, and it just transpired that particular year. Mm-hmm. And it came very close on other occasions too.
Mm-hmm. The season you refer to where they lost the second European Cup final in 1970, had they won it, your first book might even have sold even more copies.
Incidentally, my first book was called Glasgow Celtic 1945 to 1970, and the last game in it was that cup final. I think I was disappointed. Actually, it couldn't have sold any more copies because it got sold out.
And it sold out pretty quickly, didn't it?
Astonishingly. The most surprised person was my wife, for whom I blamed for the genesis of the book.
So your wife was partly to blame for you getting into writing about Celtic, but you did it remotely. You did it whilst you were in Canada. How did that process work? It must have been pretty difficult back then.
Now, you must remember I used to travel in the Penalty and Cardonald Celtic Supporters Club since I was about 12. And I have a very good memory and also a very good visual memory. I can see those games, 1940s and 50s, and remember them much more clearly than I can remember last week's game. I don't know if that happens when you get older, but I do remember those old games. Mm-hmm. And basically the research for the book was done in the National Library of Canada. I found out that they had microfilm copies of the Scotsman and the Glasgow Herald. So I got a card. I used to go up there at 8 o'clock at night, and they had a little room prepared for me, a machine set up, and the microfilms of one particular season that I'd asked for. I used to work there till midnight, take notes, and then once I had one season completely finished, I'd start writing about it, and I found it relatively easy.
How long did it take from the taking notes to writing it? How long was that process?
That's a good question. It would take about a week to get all the notes for a season, and then over the weekend I would put it into into prose, into an essay form, and then just leave it. There's a major problem with the history of a football club. Take a story. You're writing a story, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. But a football team doesn't work like that. There are good seasons and bad seasons, and you can't predict it. Though, mind you, if Celtic, as you say, had won that second European Cup, it would have worked out perfectly.
I always find it amusing, Tom, that you worked with pen to paper by hand.
Yes.
How did you get that transcribed?
Okay. Literally, it was pen to paper, and I thought of getting somebody to type it. And one of my classes in school was a business English class with 15 very attractive young ladies of 17 years of age and 18. And they were bored stiff with grammar. So I suggested, how would you like to do this? Type it, And that was right up their alley. They loved it. They typed it. And we had a pizza party at the end of it all.
Brilliant.
Sly old fox.
I know.
Oh,
eh?
yes.
Oh, brilliant.
Encouraging the young, I think I call it.
What did the staff in the library think about what you were doing?
It's a national library, and a lot of people were doing research there,
Right.
using Hansard and various things like this. And basically, I rarely saw anybody there. I saw one librarian at the time who determined what my needs were. I used to go up there at 8 o'clock at night, check in my coat, leave my briefcase behind the counter, go along to this little cubbyhole and work. And when I signed out, I just gave them the key back and went home. The only person I saw was maybe the janitor.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it can be quite a lonely existence, writing, Tom, but it took you some time for the long-awaited follow-up. Obviously, life gets in the way. How did you get in touch with Pat Woods? Because obviously your next book was co-written by Pat.
Yes, again, there's a story. Well, first of all, I had the feeling, okay, I've written a book, let's get on with life. That's that, it's done. Well, I was married, we had 2 children, raising the kids, teaching school, getting promoted, stuff like that. And then I was over here. There are only 2 reasons why people go into teaching.
To have pizza parties.
With 17-year-old girls, eh?
No. The 2 reasons why most people go into teaching are July and August. So I used to come over here every 2 or 3 years in August, watch a few football games, enjoy myself. And at the airport on the way home once, I picked up a little book by Bob Crampsey called The Scottish Professional Football Player. Read it, thought it was wonderful. And then I saw that he was the headmaster, I think it was St Ambrose in Kilsyth. So I wrote a little note saying how much I'd enjoyed it. he actually wrote back to me and said, "Are you the same one who wrote this book, which I have enjoyed? And if so, do you mind if I give your address to Pat Woods, who also has admired the book?" So Pat wrote. We wrote back and had a little correspondence. The centennial was coming up, and I consider the centennial 1987, same as Pat did, but Celtic, for some reason, have it 1888. So I wrote to Celtic offering my services to do their centennial history, and they weren't terribly interested in it. And so I told Pat that. He said, "I still think you should write it, and if you need any help with looking up material, I'll be glad to help you." So Pat sent me some stuff, and something became very obvious. This wasn't just little notes. This was massive research. Mm-hmm. And I said, there's no way I can write this book and put in, "Thank you, Pat Woods, for your great help." So I suggested we work as joint authors, co-authors, and that was the start of that.
Mm-hmm. Because Pat's a great researcher, isn't he? Is he an ex-librarian, Tom?
That's right, yeah.
And with regards to you considering that Celtic's centenary was 87, this is down to information I think that was found by yourself going through archive newspapers, that the meeting in the Carlton at St Mary's was on the 6th of November 1887.
Yeah. I actually thought that was general knowledge, and probably Pat was the one who pointed out the 6th of November. I knew it was 1887 sometime, because you must remember, the first game, 1888, they had to get the jerseys, they had to get the players, they had to make a field, they had to do all these things ahead of time. Yeah. So I think we should pay due homage to the guys who started it way back in 1887.
Yeah, the club do now, they have an annual mass now on the 6th of November. Yeah. And I think they've sort of, when we played Barcelona a couple of years ago, they said that was the anniversary, the 125th anniversary.
The 1887 for me was through reading The Glory and the Dream, I've got to confess. Mm-hmm. So I always attribute it to Campbell and Woods.
Well, we'll take the credit if you like.
Now, it's interesting that the club knocked you back, though. I mean, they had their own ideas on a centenary book, I'm guessing?
I don't think so. Well, Pat and I don't really think that they realised it was coming. Mm-hmm. Or they may have thought, well, get a writer. Get it 2 weeks before the centennial and coming out. I don't think they quite realised the importance of good, solid writing, which depends on good, solid research.
How long did it take you and Pat to put that together?
Again, that's an interesting question, because I tend to... It takes me about 7 months, 8 months to write a book, but then I just put it aside for at least 6 months, don't even think about it, don't even look at it, and then I look at it again and see if it still hangs together. I would say about 2 years, The Glory and the Dream. Incidentally, the title was Pat's idea, which I think is a great title.
It's a fantastic title.
It comes from a poem by Wordsworth. Where has it fled, the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? Which fits in exactly with the history of Celtic, founded for charity, and then became a business. A decent, honourable business, but a business just the same.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful title.
Yeah.
And I thought it was yourself all those years that had given it that title, because obviously you're very much well read, Tom. You love your literature. You're a big fan of Kerouac, Oscar Wilde, and I think that comes through in your writing.
A Glory and a Dream, though, when that came out, I remember it coming out, and everybody was buying it. Everybody wanted that book. It was getting passed round the supporter club I was in at that point, going, "You've read this, you've read this." Mm-hmm. It was the staple stocking filler.
Well, it came out at the right time.
Yes.
And it was pretty comprehensive. Actually, there's a Scottish publishers, Mainstream, in Edinburgh, and they've done very well. This was their first big book. Mm-hmm. And their two partners, Bill Campbell and Peter Mackenzie, they've told us that we actually saved their company. You know, they were struggling, and then suddenly this book came out, well, they published it and distributed it and did well with it.
Mm-hmm. And it's the biggest selling Celtic book of all time, as far as we're aware.
Yeah, it's hard to say about numbers. Publishers, as you know, tried to keep these secret.
I wonder why.
I wonder why too.
Now that takes us on nicely to probably my second favourite Tom Campbell book, where you wrote about the World Club Championship. It's a very interesting story how that book came to fruition, Tom. How did you put that together? And can you share some of your experiences of going over to Argentina with us?
Yeah, I retired from teaching in Ottawa in 1989, wrote a couple of books. In general, was a bit bored, and so I started teaching again and took a job in El Salvador, of all places, watched South American football on television. One night came home to watch Racing Club play Boca Juniors and figured out from the commentary that if Racing lost, they would be relegated. So I settled down to a very enjoyable evening. But the funny thing was, the more I watched the game, the more sympathetic I became to Racing. They played a bit like Celtic, a bit attacking football, off the cuff. And I was looking at their supporters. Okay, bare-chested and sort of making out all sorts of funny noises, but they looked a bit familiar too. And then I thought, maybe there's more to this series than meets the eye. And when I get back I was living in Scotland at the time, I happened to be speaking to Bob Crampsey, and he said, why don't you go over there? I said, what? To Argentina? He said, yeah, that'd be a great idea. Go over, meet some of these people, get an insight. And he said, then he came up with a great idea. He said, you know, the Scottish Arts Council has never given any money for a sports book. Why don't you apply for a grant? And not only that, I'll write a letter of reference. So I got a grant for £1,500 from the Scottish Arts Council, which paid more or less for the expenses over there. Went over and had a great time. Started off in the Dazzler Hotel, and there were 5 assistant managers, all about 25 to 30 years of age, all of them called Diego. And they insisted on putting me in a taxi to get to the ground. Taxis apparently could be dangerous. And I went out there every day for a week, played the part of the daft laddie to perfection, and it worked. Met their club historian, met their most famous player, met El Presidente, and was actually a guest of their last game of the season. I was told to please come by taxi. No problem. Be there at least an hour and a half before the game. So the taxi driver, he got the instructions, Racing Estadio, and he looked utterly astonished. He wants to go to Racing, to the stadium? His expression was, Esta noche? Nighttime? And then I distinctly heard the word loco, which means crazy, you know. On goes the taxi, half an hour ride, cost $5. And then he says, there's a problem. And the problem was automobiles weren't allowed within 300 yards of the stadium on match days. He didn't explain why, but he just indicated that that was the policy. Across the road, about 20 policemen, visors, billy sticks, pepper spray, automatic weapons, the whole bit. And behind them, another row of 20 policemen with German Alsatians, Rottweilers, etc. So I was beginning to get a little bit worried. The taxi driver went out, spoke to the sergeant, and the sergeant took one guy out, and that young man walked me down this a street, with 300 yards. And when we got there, actually, he walked along and his hand was hovering on his revolver all the time. There didn't seem any danger for it. And then another problem, there's more policemen there, and this is the part for the visiting spectators. So it was decided I'd have to go back and then walk all the way around the stadium. And this sergeant looked at my young constable and picked out a big brute as well. So there I was between these two policemen back, and the other sergeant said, 5 minutos, you've got 5 minutes. So we walked round, finally saw the Racing supporters. They looked at me, I looked at them. I looked different from them. They smiled, I smiled. They waved, I waved. They would shout it out, "Hoi, gringo!" So I just waved back to them. And then when I get into the stadium, into the director's room, or Hall of Fame as he called it, spoke to El Presidente. He asked me, "How did you like our supporters?" And I thought they just looked like us, you know, coats, scarves, pies and bovril, the whole bit. I said, "Really nice, very friendly." And I told them they waved and smiled. And he said a most surprising thing. He said, "You know, they saw you and a policeman on either side. They thought you were under arrest, so you were okay."
You fitted in.
Fitted in perfectly.
Another story of your journey over there, Tom, because I mean the lengths that you've gone to write that book are quite incredible. But one of the difficulties in writing a book is to source good illustrations, good images. How did you go about getting some pictures for that?
I have a slight moral dilemma here, but here goes. I went to a newspaper called El Gráfico, which is like the old picture post here. It specialised in photographs. Met a reporter whose father was a Racing supporter, whose grandfather was a Racing supporter, and he took me to see the man in charge of photographs, Alejandro del Bosco, I think his name was. And I mentioned that I'd only seen 4 or 5 pictures of those games. He looked surprised. Did they have any more? He showed me about 500 pictures from it, and my tongue was hanging out. However, he told me also that the men upstairs, the suits, had realised the commercial value of these, and each picture would cost about $25. That was a problem. But then he said, "But you know, in Argentina, there's always a way." Okay? So I went up to that paper every afternoon, had a couple of lunches with the guys, a great time. And in Alejandro's little office, one day he asked me, "What do I think of Diego Maradona?" And this was a moment of truth, you know, thinking, cheating little Dago bastard. Yeah, but it was against England. And I remembered what one of the Racing players had said about Jimmy Johnston. Magnifico, superbo, el best. So I come up with that. He ran over to the door, strolled over to the door, pulled down the blind, locked the door, went into his filing cabinet, pulled out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, and we toasted each other. Argentina, Escocia, Diego, Racing, Celtic, you know. And then he come up and said, "Tomorrow we go over to," and I'm not going to mention the name of the paper because of what happened there, "and we'll meet somebody there." We went over to this broadsheet, met the director of photographs there, and he too had files on this game on the desk. And then he said something rather surprising. He said, "Senor, I am a busy man. Sometimes I have to think. I like to look out the window and think for a minute at a time." I was rather puzzled at this. He goes over to the window and stares out the window, and Alejandro, take the pictures. So I ended up with about 50 photographs. And afterwards, Alejandro said, "Tom and I are going out for dinner tonight. It will be my pleasure if you could join us." We went out and had a steak dinner, the whole bit, a couple of bottles of wine, some beer, liqueurs, everything. It cost about $30. So the meal lasted about 4 hours, but cost me $30-odd.
And you got your images for the book.
Yes.
That's how it works in Argentina.
And the interesting thing is, I keep seeing them duplicated in other publications. There is no morality nowadays, is there?
It's outrageous, Tom.
I agree with you.
Another thing, Tom, that I like to pose to you is through the bibliography that you built up, and obviously Pat's work, David's work, around Celtic literary circles, you three are called the Holy Trinity of Celtic historians. How does that feel when you hear that?
I guess when you hang around for a long time, you get to be well known about that, you know.
I think it's a level of respect, really. You know, for anybody thinking about writing a Celtic book, they need to really go and do their research, and
Definitely.
they need to read a few of these books that we've mentioned.
Everything I write, it's your books that I go to.
Okay.
If I need to get anything in my head or facts, figures, just to make sure that I'm right, it's a glory in the dream.
I think Pat has a lot to do with that. He's a demon for accuracy, you know.
And even the descriptions,
I
the prose, especially the players. I recently wrote something for Paul about Neely Mockin.
Yes.
But I had to go to your books to learn about Willie Fernie, Charlie Tully and that. I never saw them, and there's very little footage of them, eh? So your prose brung them to life to me, to thousands like me.
Actually, one of the things which bothers me a little bit about a lot of books, people have sentences like 5 minutes from the end, Nakamura netted from close in. Well, that doesn't tell me very much. I mean, how did he score? Was it right foot, left foot? Was it through the goalie's legs? Was it into the roof of the net? And I kind of feel that there has to be that accuracy or that detail. And as I say, for the older days, I remember a lot. Nowadays, I can look at videos and that makes it easy.
Mm-hmm. You're right, though. I think that in order to bring it to life, Tom, there needs to be more than that. It can't be a simple reporting of facts, you know, who scored the goal and what the score was. And reading what you have done so far, you do certainly bring it to life. It's incredible that a lot of it in the early days is through memory. And when we're looking at players like Charlie Tully, Bobby Evans, these are people that you've written biographies of.
Yeah, you're right.
What's your plans over the next few years? Because I know you've got a huge canon of work. What's your plans with that?
Well, about 5 years ago, I had major health problems, and so some of the books I had, I sort of halted, you know, with maybe 75% done. So as you say, there's a whole canon of work there. There's about 4 books which I now have finished, and I'd like to have them published. But as you've mentioned already, publishers are a bit of an awkward breed, and I'm not so sure that I'll be working with some of publishers again. I might be publishing these books privately or maybe find somebody. But there's a book about Joe McBride that I've about 40% into, and he went to the same high school as I did, and I knew him slightly. I was 3-4 years older than Joe, and I really feel that it's time Joe got a biography. And no less a person than Alec Ferguson believes so too. He's given me some great information about Joe. What else? There is a book that David Potter and I have finished. Just needs to be tidied up a wee bit. It was supposed to be 100 great Celts. That was maybe just a little bit too much, so we reduced it to 67. And the provisional title, is going to be Forever Celtic, which I think is a good title. And as it happened, 67 great Celts. David did 33 of them. I did 33 of them. And there's a young PhD student at Stirling University whose thesis is on Brother Walford. So we invited him to do that one, which worked out perfectly for everybody. David and I were equal billing, and young Michael Connolly makes his debut as a Celtic author.
And we're looking forward to hopefully a release in 2019 of that book.
Yes, And there's another book. Some years ago, I wrote a book. I called it When 10 Men Won the League. And I kind of, I think this is when I had some health problems and just stopped with it, 95% done. Well, I've finished it now, and next year will be the 40th anniversary of that, May the 21st, if you're interested. And I think I'd like to have that one published. It's an interesting book because I don't think you can write too much. I don't think you can write 100,000 words on one game. So I've tried to bring in other things which fits that game into the whole Celtic history. For example, one journalist said that Roy Aitken gave a performance that night that no Celtic player has ever matched. Well, what about Jimmy Quinn in 1903? What about Charlie Tully in 1953? And what about various other players? Mm-hmm. What about Henrik Larsson in Seville? So I managed to... I don't think I padded it out. I think we've paid due credit to these other players.
Mm-hmm. Tom, one final question. You've seen the best of times, the worst of times. We're now in a situation where we've been spoiled over the last couple of seasons with Brendan Rodgers.
You can't keep up the same pace all the time. My favourite poet, William Wordsworth, once said something about the first fine, careless rapture. I just think of the way the Lisbon Lions played the first 2 seasons under Jock Stein. They could never keep that up, and it wouldn't be expected of them. And I think something similar has happened here, though I don't think the present team are anything like as good as the Lions were. It's too bad Dembele left. I think there was a possibility that he could be the next Larsson, but I don't think we have anybody quite of that stature.
Tom Campbell, thank you very much for joining us at A Celtic State of Mind.
You're very welcome.
Thank you,
sir. Thank you very much.
Fansbet are a new online bookmaker who promise to share 50% of their net profits from tagged accounts for causes that matter the most to fans. The business is about fans and run by match-going supporters, and we at A Celtic State of Mind are delighted to be partnered with them. If having a bet is already part of your match day and something you enjoy doing on football, racing or any sport, then you can download the Fansbet app to sign up. If you do so, then please select Celtic as your club and A Celtic State of Mind, and you'll be making a contribution to keeping your podcast going and supporting other Celtic causes. They've already helped to make a difference to the fan community by contributing to fanzines, supporter trusts, branches with travel costs, and they were also part of the first safe standing installation in England at Shrewsbury Town. You can visit blog.fansbet.com to read more about that on their Giving Back page. All of our podcasts, articles and videos can now be found on intocreative.co.uk. This site encapsulates our love of Celtic, music, books, film, politics and much more. Pay us a visit, check out our shop for merchandise and contribute your working ideas to the site. As always, thank you all for listening. Join us again next week where we will have another guest with A Celtic State of Mind.